Okay, brilliant, thank you. So first, yeah, thank you all very much for coming. This is a roundtable, which is one of the actions in an action research project that I'm the principal investigator for, called the Liminal Zone, which is funded by the Carnegie Trust for Scottish Universities and has been running during this calendar year, and happening really very much thanks to Rosie Newman, who's my collaborator in the project and has done an absolute ton of work to organise what's been quite a complex project so far. And so what I'm going to do is very briefly introduce the project and some of our findings. Rosie's going to show us some of the creative work in it, and then most of the time we'll spend in discussion about how we can, from an institutional point of view, support creative arts staff achieving a good balance between their teaching and their creative practice. So this project is, as I said, it's an action research project. It has involved 4 action research cycles, the first of which was a quantitative survey, the second of which was a qualitative series of interviews, the third of which is creative responses by a core group of participants, and the fourth of which is looking at the institutional impacts and implications of the project. So what I'll do is I'll share my screen, and hopefully so I now can't see you at all, because can somebody shout if that's visible?
Yep, looks good, Mandy.
Great. Okay, so the Liminal Zone project is fundamentally an exploration of the seashore as a metaphor for the interface between teaching and creative practice, particularly of creative arts staff in colleges and universities within Scotland. Although we have had input and participation from people out with Scotland, and I recognise that a lot of the conversation today will be quite UHI specific, but yeah, we're hoping that the results are much more widely applicable around Scotland. We are focused on the creative arts to make it a manageable project over the course of the year, but again we're quite clear that quite a few of the findings and insights that have been had are relevant to the interface between teaching and creative practice in all sorts of other disciplines, and we by no means are claiming that the creative arts are the only creative academic discipline. I just wanted to make that quite clear. And I'm a poet, that's my creative practice, and I also write novels, and what I'm really centrally interested in is in metaphor as a really powerful thought process. I'm interested in what Lakoff and Johnson describe as the power of metaphor to create a reality. I think metaphor is a fundamental part of how we conceive of the world in many different dimensions, and it can make a real impact on how we think about our society, how we tackle political issues, how we tackle all kinds of issues about our own identities. So it's in that spirit of trying to actually think about things afresh that I'm advocating that we use the shoreline metaphor. And because I live at the shore, and I'm really interested in the tidal zone, that porous, ever-shifting boundary, as an interesting way of thinking about boundaries in our lives. So the core question of the project is, how do we balance our teaching and creative practice? I'm relatively new back to academia after more than 20 years as a freelancer, and so that was a personal issue for me, and I want this project, and we've led this project in a spirit of appreciative inquiry. So we're looking for solutions, we're looking for good ideas, we're looking at what works, we're looking at best practice and finding people who've got inspiring things to say about how they do manage to achieve that balance in their working lives. So we can interpret this metaphor in two very different ways, in what Lakoff calls two inconsistent but coherent interpretations. One of which is that we see teaching as land, and we help our students to build their craft, and then our creative practices on the sea, or in the sea, and we seeing the creative practices as the sea part of that interface. Or we can look at it the other way around, and we can see creative practice as the dry land and the sea as teaching. So when the participants and people we've consulted with in the project are kind of roughly divided between whether their instinct is that teaching is the sea or teaching is the land. And the interesting thing about the tidal zone is that it's highly rhythmic, it's highly mobile. And so we've asked a lot of questions and found out a lot of insights to think about the way these two aspects of our lives ebb and flow. So we've had lots of really brilliant input and lots of creative responses to this metaphor over the course of the year. And it's not possible to do justice to that in this short time, but I can obviously give much more detail if people are interested. But here's three examples. My creative practice is a wave in the ocean and my teaching is the shore. Creative practice is definitely the land that's at risk from rising sea levels and dramatic weather events. One might think of the rhythms of tides and of academic semesters. When the tide of teaching ebbs, the land of creative practice is once again visible, available for exploration. So lots of really positive thinking about the interaction between these two different aspects of our lives. However, this metaphor also threw up all sorts of evidence that creative arts staff are not achieving a balance between the two aspects of their lives. And a lot of our evidence and some of the things we'll present briefly now sort of show that there is actually a problem that we do need to address. Perhaps even from the point of view of some people, a crisis for which we need a Coast Guard. And so, yeah, given that the purpose of this discussion is to try to look at what can we do, then yeah, how can we make sure that our institutions are providing that Coast Guard service? If people who are teaching feel like it's an overwhelming sea eroding the shore of their practice, that they're drowning or engulfed or struggling to get back to their creative practice. So that feeling that came out from some of the uses of the metaphors is backed up by the quantitative data that that was generated from our survey. We had 60 responses from staff, mostly from Scotland, and here are some of the key pieces of very striking data from that survey. And again, I can give much more detail if people want it. About 2/3 of our respondents are not full-timers. I think that's an interesting, an interesting finding. Overwhelmingly, people feel that their creative practice has a positive effect on their teaching, and also overwhelmingly feel that their teaching has a positive impact on their creative practice. So it's quite clear there's a really positive synergy between these two parts of their work. Interestingly, everybody wants to have more time to spend on their creative practice, and more than half are spending less than one day of a week on their creative practice. So it's very much it's been crowded for time. And unfortunately, only 31% of people feel supported in their creative practice by their employers. We've been looking, like I said, it's an appreciative inquiry, and we've asked for lots of examples of support that is available. And here's some of the examples: studio space, digital facilities, library, exhibition space, and so on. And hopefully we can generate more ideas about what kind of support can be provided to creative arts staff. So we had a core group of people, and we asked them to come together and to create creative responses to this metaphor. And I'll hand over now to Rosie to give us some insights and some examples of the creative responses that people have given.
Hi, thanks, Mandy. I'll just try and put that up on my screen. Can you see that? I'm hoping you can hear things too. Sorry, I can't see you guys. So, Mandy, can you see that?
Yes, we can see that, yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so the participants that were selected had all responded positively or unusually to the online questionnaire, and they were invited to a weekend retreat at Loch Maddie. Mandy and I had met them individually online or on a shoreline to interview them, but the whole group had not met before, and there was certainly an air of adventure and excitement as most people had travelled a long way to get to the venue, and the journey involved crossing the sea. So the artists were selected from a wide variety of creative disciplines. This included visual artists, musicians, poets, and lecturers were chosen from across UHI partnerships and other Scottish universities. And Tai Kesaba was perfect as a location, and the discussions, creative workshops and swimming were guided by the tides. This slideshow will give you a taster of some examples of the creative responses made by participants after the retreat. There'll be a physical exhibition of the finished artworks at Murray College, UHI, in January 2022. So the first artist, Tonya Rennell, is an experimental writer and educator. She's recorded a video of herself responding to the liminal zone as a metaphor for the porous boundary between teaching and creative practice. And so I'll show you a snippet of this recording. The full recording will be available online. And I hope this works.
Prologue. I know very little about tides. I don't know their proper names. I don't know the rules. I only know the rhythms. I know the tides on instinct, not from a boat, not from on water. I know the tide from the shore, from the shoreline, from inside the waters when I am swimming. I know very little about tides. I don't know the rules of the tides. I don't know the regiments. I don't know how to read them. I know the tides on instinct. If I don't know the rules of the tides, have I just made them up? In my family, we call that balanced space between shore and tide, when it is neither high nor low, the slack tide. I recently learned it is called the neap.
I'm going to stop just there, but like I say, you can see more of Tonya's recording online. I'm going to show you some examples here of Tonya's experimental essays. So the next artist is me. I'm Rosie Newman. And since the lockdown, I've been swimming in the sea with some local women in my town, my seaside town. And it's awoken a fascination with the sea and the liminal zone of the tidal range. And over the year, I've been submerging steel plates into the Cromarty Firth and exploring the action of the surface on the metal. This has resulted in a sculpture where the steel rope and reflection make up 3.7 meters, the tidal range of the Cromarty Firth. And I'll play you a short film of some of that underwater footage. Anna Wendy Stevenson is a composer and a musician. She's a senior lecturer as well in applied music at Lewis Castle College. And in response to the liminal zone as a metaphor for the porous boundary between teaching and creative practice, she has chosen the reel of The Little Turn from Sweet Lewis. And I'll play this as you watch the rest of the presentation. I hope you can hear it okay. Thank you. That's the end of the slide share. I think you're on mute, Mandy. Oh, we lost Mandy. Oh, yeah, here we go.
Thank you. So yeah, time is pressing on. One of the outcomes of this project is going to be is a draft policy that we're suggesting could be adopted by should be adopted by institutions to support their creative arts staff, and this policy basically aims to nurture staff's creative practice, and it involves several value statements valuing the multiple benefits of creative practice, recognising and supporting staff to do these things, recognising it's not limited to art subjects, seeing creative practice as valid research, and encouraging staff to link their creative practice with their teaching. And it involves 6 very specific recommendations about, so there are 3 recommendations about specific ways in which time can be allocated to staff to do their creative practice, and also mechanisms that are perhaps softer about the kinds of activities and resources that can be made available, and ways in which student experiences can be enhanced. So I'm going to put those mechanisms in the chat so that you can read them at your leisure, and basically invite people who are here to respond to anything that you've heard so far. And in particular, there are some people here that have been thinking about this already. So there's a couple of people from our reference group of senior managers. There are colleagues who have been participants in the research. There are students who've come along specifically to respond to this. So I'm going to ask, and I know that some of our senior managers in particular have got real time pressures. So if it would be all right with you, we were going to leave the senior managers till the end, but I'm aware that you've got limited time, and wonder whether actually what we could do is get you to respond first, and then we will. Yeah, are any of you able? I know Chris and Sharon are both here. Are either of you able to stay for like another 10 minutes? Because
Mandy, I really want to stay. It's apparently to do with the psychology revalidation or something that I need to run to. And I was just typing something in the chat. Can I just say, and absolutely abuse my position. Sorry, thank you, everybody. I've read through the statements. I think the intent within the statement is absolutely one that I support. For those that don't know me, my background is within art and design and aesthetics, and I've actually worked with Karen Ann Dickens, who's on the screen, for example, at Gray's as part and parcel of the submission and the research work that was done there, and developed various strategies at Cardiff School of Art and at Birmingham School of Art. And we built everything that we did on the work that Colin Painter did when he was the principal at Wimbledon School of Art, and he defined the way that research sat within the art school sector. And that was used for the RAE definitions and then the REF definitions of what creative practice research is. And interestingly, music took a long time to catch up. Music within the context that we understand within the visual arts as a research tool and as a research outcome was only accepted probably 8 years ago, 9 years ago, ahead of this REF submission within music. So what I was starting to say in the chat is that I absolutely agree and support everything that you've put into that document to date. But what I would say is that it does not go far enough. The work, the hard miles have already been earned in other institutions and by some fantastic people. I don't think we should even contemplate justifying what they've already achieved. I think that what they've done, and I think the definition in particular of Group Panel D in the current REF, or the 21 REF, I think that the definition of that group and all of the subgroups, the units of assessment that sit underneath it, the work is there and the justification is there, and that ought to be our starting point. So interestingly, and Mandy, of course, you know Vicky Johnson well, somebody that Vicky used to work with was the chair of Group Panel D. And my advice is, and I'm going to have to run away from this meeting, I'm so sorry to drop a bombshell and run away. My advice would be, he's called Bruce Brown, Professor Bruce Brown, get Bruce up and have him critically read and steer what it is that we're trying to achieve. Mm-hmm. Because how can you argue with all those people that have already done it? Mm. So I completely support what you're doing. And even though I'm a manager and I know that you're after time away from the classroom and teaching and so on, I completely support what you're doing and the way that you're thinking. But I want it to be incredibly robust. And I want people to understand that whether it's a music submission, an art and design submission, poetry, or whatever it is, the UOAs in Panel D have already decided what represents the highest quality of research interaction. And I'm going to run away and leave you with that. So sorry.
No, but great. Thanks, Chris. It's really good to have an endorsement like that and to be encouraged to take it up the next level and strengthen it even further. So yeah, thank you very much indeed. That's brilliant. Cheers. So, and Sharon's also had to duck off. So I know that there are some students here as well, and obviously students are at the absolute heart of the of our teaching world, and so it would be great if we could invite one or other of the students to express your view on what you think about this balance between teaching and creative practice in the staff who you're encountering. I can see, I know that Helen is one of them, and I can see you on screen. So Helen, do you want to go for it?
Yes, yeah, I'm here, thank you. Yeah, I mean, as an art-based research student, active at the moment, I think my supervisors are active in research, and that's really important to me, that they're kind of up to date in terms of, you know, research methodology and ways of thinking, and they're kind of sharing that with me actively. It's really important. But in terms of the policy, there's a couple of things, I've read it and reread it, and there's a couple of things that sort of jump out at me that I thought might be worth mentioning. So in the mechanisms, the first one is quite precise in terms of what it's saying about the way time should be separated out into sections. So there's a 0.4 full-time equivalent of teaching, and a 0.4 of creative practice research, and then a 0.2 for administration, which seems quite precise to me and quite definitely sort of separated into chunks of time. But then in number 4, it talks about soft time and porous time and fluid time. And I'm just wondering how those two kind of ways of thinking about it sit together, because one seems quite delineated, and then the other one saying, but it's porous and it can move between one and the other. And I'm just interested as to how that might work in reality. So it'd be quite helpful for me to, for maybe you could explain that a bit more, or we could talk about it a bit more. Sorry.
No, that's great. And what I'm going to, instead of me talking too much, I'm going to keep passing the baton around, and hopefully others may well find themselves responding to these kinds of things. So we've got with us, so thank you very much, Helen, and we've got with us several of the participants in the who have been part of the retreat and part of the community of practice that's growing around this. So could I invite Stacey Toner to let us know what you think about this policy and how you're thinking about this?
Yeah, I think the first thing that came into mind, Helen, in response to your question was the different approaches to how we all work. So for me, I think that very definite breakup of time works operationally as a representation of how much time we would be spending on A, B, or C. But actually, I think anyone that does already have research time within their contract, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want to speak for everyone, but for me, it does not happen on one day from 9 to 5. There's bits going on every day at night out in the community, and actually that kind of 0.2 or 0.4 is just a way to represent what we're doing, but it doesn't necessarily work like that in practice. So I think that is, for me, something that needs to be down on paper for some people to understand how time is distributed, but actually the reality of the delivery of that is quite different and shifts from week to week. Paul, I'll hand over to yourself.
Hi. Yeah, I'm just I'm thinking about the arrangements, very welcome structure of breaking down creative practice and other things. There's a bit of me can't quite believe it's going to happen, to be honest with you. And I'm thinking of my own teaching commitments. I mean, I'm someone that I engage in mainly in creative writing, and I've had a very busy semester. And I think I've done a couple of words here and there, maybe something of haiku length or 2 sentences, but I haven't had time to immerse myself in my work, or even to follow up on productive teaching sessions with my own writing. And so I'm one of the portion of people that, you know, feel somewhat frustrated. And, you know, I'm just wondering, is there any specifications or criteria for people that might be considered and included in that contractual breakdown? I'd love it if that happened for me, but I'm a little bit reserved about it actually happening.
Mm. Surely it should be all of us. Rosie, I'm seeing you on screen as well, and you're another of our participants. So do you want to chip in?
Yeah. Hi. Can you hear me? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. And I've noticed that Karen's got a hand up as well, so I don't want to. Well, yeah. I was just thinking about a point in response to Helen and Stacey, and I think that alongside this kind of contractual, you know, assignment of time, there also needs to be a bit of a shift in the culture around that for management, that there's like a real respect for that it's not something that is a kind of, you know, a lucky add-on or a bonus add-on, you know, that's really, really essential, that it remains as that time, and that other duties don't, that it's not just sort of a space for other duties to kind of bleed into. So that was my thought, but I'll just keep it brief because I know that Karen, you've actually put your hand up there. So.
Go for it, Karen.
Yeah, I mean, I found it really, really difficult to get any sort of creative practice done at the moment. I don't think I've done anything since I started at Inverness College. But one of the big difficulties I have is also not having workshop or facilities or tools within Inverness College to even put my creative practice into play with the students. But I think another issue as well is, you know, not necessarily having the time outside the college, but working with the students, timetabling. If the students were put into one room for a whole day, so it feels like a studio rather than a classroom for 2 hours. Other universities tend to have lecturers working on their own craft in the classroom setting, which students then learn from and can watch without it necessarily being a formal teaching experience. And for my practice, I mean, some of my work takes over a month of 9 till 5 to make, so getting some form of remission from teaching isn't going to touch the surface of what it is that I make and what I do. But I also think as well, in terms of the timetabling at Inverness College, having one tutor for a whole day that can merge projects together can make things much more productive and allows much more freedom and time for teaching staff to actually input their own research into teaching as well, and to get stuff out of it as well. I think that's everything that I've written. Yeah.
Brilliant, thanks, Karen. I know we do also have at least one other student with us, and so Robert, I think you're a either current student or recent student. It'd be lovely again to get another student perspective if you're up for it.
Yeah, can you hear me? Can you see me?
We can hear you but not see you.
Oh, right, that's interesting. Someone's just walked in with a phone. Wait a minute, come back to me maybe.
Okay, I'll come back to you in a minute. Okay, Roxanne, would you have any thoughts you'd like to contribute? And Rosie, is that, I think there might be at least one other student in the group that I'm maybe not familiar with. But
Suzanne, I don't know if you're there, Suzanne, but I can't see her name, but she was waiting in the lobby.
Okay, I'll look out for a Suzanne.
Also Stephen, who's invited and accepted, but I can't. Maybe they've had trouble getting in.
Okay.
But Robert, he's there now. I can see.
We can see you now. Oh, briefly, we could see you, Robert. Okay, we'll come back to Robert when he's visible. Roxanne, did you want to say anything on this topic? I know you've been thinking about it as well.
Yeah. Well, firstly, I was really heartened to hear Chris Neal's response, and I agree with him. where to start? I mean, this has always been an issue. I mean, I've worked in art colleges for a number of decades now, and it was, I mean, my experience in UHI is really very different, and I think part of that is because of the base for most of the academic partners coming in from further education, being further education colleges. So there hasn't been recognition or a sense of a research environment in any of them. A long time ago, I mean, all of the art colleges I worked in offered for a full-time contract, lecturers had a day away. So they were in 4 days a week and had a day out to do their where the expectation was they do their practice. The RAE and now ZREF came in and started to kind of wreak havoc with that, kind of simultaneous to the introduction of what was called new contracts. And I first experienced that in England. And then when I came up and I worked at Robert Gordon University for a while, and I think I might have been the first one in the art school that had one of these new contracts. So that kind of wreaked havoc also with the traditional kind of view that artists, lecturers would use all the holiday times to do work. So I, for instance, my last summer at Gray's, I was expected to work in the summer because I only had 8 weeks holiday. And because I was seen as research active, then I was able to buy in cover, so I didn't have to teach in the summer for the MA program. So I think, and now, I mean, really late in my academic life, I've become a research fellow. And exactly my first contracts, I had 2 contracts. One was for 2 days a week as a research fellow, and one for 3 days a week in the department for creative industries. So that kind of broke down into me having teaching for 3 days a week. And of course, your admin gets included in all of that. And then 2 days a week for my research-based practice. That's really, really hard to maintain. And there's particular reasons. I think the program I lead is grown exponentially. So we have a lot of students. So what I was able to do at the beginning and kind of keep it in balance has kind of got out of whack. The last thing I'll say is I think that I've always worked in relation to the academic semesters as the tides. I like to comment about the tide because you know, I've always been teaching, and my teaching and my practice are wholly integrated. And I think that's really important. I have never taught anything that I don't actually do in my own practice. And I think that that's what, you know, the students should always be taught by people who are doing what they're being taught, you know, who actively practice that. So I have a work pattern that is linked to the academic semesters in many ways too. So that's my metaphor, is the rhythm of the tides. The semesters are the tides, that rhythm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks, Roxanne. No, and it's great to bring us back to that metaphor again. It's like, yeah, I encourage anybody who has any thoughts on that matter to please share them. Robert, have you got made progress with your video, or do you want to just talk to us anyway?
I'm just going to have to talk to you. I'm actually sitting in a school on a terrible school laptop, which doesn't seem to be working. So I can speak to you. Yeah, interesting. I'm coming from a completely different place. I'm working in my special ed school 5 days a week. So I haven't got any kind of time for practice, obviously. But yeah, I'm going to jump off on the back of what someone just said. Since I've graduated from art school, graduated from the Glasgow School of Art last year, it's totally integrating with the kids that I work with. So all of the kind of aesthetics of the classroom have started to kind of come into my own practice. I don't have any research time, so kind of the work that I did in schools starting to seep in really literally. So like doing some monoprints with the kids, they're sort of like my little studio slaves or something. And then that kind of literally take the stuff they make and put it into my work. So it's sort of become really kind of combined. I don't have much perspective on university things. I mean, what I did love when I was at the School of Art, I know that in the old Mac, there used to be lecture studios actually in the Mac. So you could go up to the studios and have a look. Someone else was kind of talking about something like this. So that would be kind of interesting. But yeah, I'm not in a university setting, so I can't really comment too much on what you're proposing, but yeah.
No, thank you. I think that in itself is a really useful comment to make. I can see Anne Bevan has got her hand up. Would Anne go for it?
Okay, thanks. So if you could see, can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, I've just put the camera on mute most of the day, so I don't know if there's any open lines. But yeah, no, really, just to add, I mean, I just think it's a great theme, and I put in the chat there. I'm so sorry I didn't really manage to engage with the in the research project, but really happy to get more involved now if there was a chance. But just to say, I put a couple of links into projects that I've done, which are completely research-led, including teaching projects, because it involves students at various stages in them. They've been completely interdisciplinary and collaborative, all of that stuff that we've been talking about at the conference. But it's been a way, I mean, I'm maybe lucky in the my illustrative practice is completely to do with these subjects that I'm kind of engaging in research projects, but with teaching, so to do with the tide and liminal zones and littoral zones and all of that. So that's one thing, you know, just encourage people to try and gear projects around things that you're interested in, and that might be of relevance, one would hope, to your, you know, local place. But we're all, I mean, these are, I mean, but they're actually two separate things too. I mean, the kind of contractual thing is massive. It's you know, the questions there in every art college probably in the world, not even in Scotland. And there's just two things I would say about that. Is one is that everybody should get an element of professional development. School teachers get that as well, and I know that tends to be more pedagogically orientated, but not necessarily. So I think hold out for that in your contract. You know, get the elbows out. But in terms of research time, I mean, if you want to get funding in, we've got to go for the ref and get funding in. So, I mean, Roxanne and I have been submitted to the last ref. I was this one, and it basically creates a funding flow into your college. So it's not a massive amount, but it buys, in theory, it buys some time out for me. It's in my head, at least, whether practically you get to use it. But it is there. UHI is small enough that, you know, we get to manage that budget. And, you know, if each college could have one creative person who's leading, you know, a support structure to help people get to ref, which we should be talking about now, that doesn't seem to really be happening, then we could get funding coming through, you know, and we're talking about, I mean, I think just for one submission, it's, I mean, off the top of my head, it's something like 12 grand, you know, just to my tiny department. So, you know, I mean, it's better than a kick in the teeth sort of thing, and at least it's an acknowledgement that you are getting, you know, there has got to be some recognition of research in your contract, and so that you've got to push for that. So it's a two-way thing. It's the managers, but I think it's also us, because you need to adapt your practice to kind of not to change it, but to adapt, or to find a way to contextualize your practice within that sort of wider research. And you know, I'd be really happy to kind of talk to folk more about that, and you know, maybe Roxanne, we could. I know we have previously had sort of sessions talking about the ref and funding, but I think if you haven't been part of it, you don't, you know, it's a sort of dark mystery, but it's actually just quite straightforward, and it's really important that we kind of think about getting engaged with it, even if it doesn't happen. I mean, the flip side of it is I used to work at ECA, and they're now part of Edinburgh University, and if you're part of the research there, I think normally you get 40%, but the pressure on you to perform at an international level is really up there. So, you know, I think in some ways, you know, I think be careful what we wish for too, because I wouldn't want to have that amount of pressure on me, because you really do need to change your practice, I think, sometimes to get there. You know, you're going highly academic, I would be. So anyway, I think that's all I was going to say, but I think it's a great project, Mandy and Rosie. Thanks for keeping me in the loop too.
No, thanks very much. Wise words, Anne, and great offer, which I'm sure we will be, we'll be picking that up with you. I can see, Stacey, you've got a hand up. Do you want to come back in?
Yeah, just quickly, in response to Anne, if you are going to have those conversations, I'd love to be part of that, because to me, I'm still in the dark hole of ref and how to navigate that. So that would be hugely helpful. I also totally understand what you're saying about pressure, and without sounding too negative, I think there still needs to be some pressure there, because I think there are some staff that aren't practicing, and actually that's an issue for teaching. So I think that's a really important conversation that we have to have around that standard of practice and then bringing it into the classroom. But also in response to Karen, I know what you were saying about Inverness and facilities, and another thing that came up as part of our discussion was, aside from contracts and everything else, trying to be a bit more proactive and sharing expertise and what we do already have, rather than waiting for things to come to us. So Murray has a gallery space, we've got printmaking, and we've got a darkroom. So that offer is out to anyone. All you need to do is email me and we can work out come in and using it and whatever that looks like. So from a Murray point of view, that's on the table as an offer.
Great offer, thanks, Stacey. And no, really another really wise remark. Are there others? I think Steve is there. I saw you pop up. Are you wanting to chip in, Steve?
Hello. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, go for it.
Lovely. So I was just having a wee read of point 5 of, we will support staff by making financial or in-kind resources available and things like that. And I was wondering, like, if obviously that's going to cost money, and that money has to come from somewhere. And I know you don't want to see like creative practice as a benefit, but more of something that's like already included and that kind of thing. But I think from like a financial perspective, for the institution to facilitate those spaces, having something in addition to your benefits package as part of your pay to basically invest in those spaces, would that be something that you'd be open to? Because everything that people want has to be paid for, and I think it's maybe a little bit what's the word? A little bit too much positive thinking to think that the institution will pay for it all for you. So maybe, I don't know, like with some benefits in pay packets, like, you have dental, you have like a company car, or you have other things. It's like a few £1 a month out of your pay packet, but then because they're kind of taking a little bit of money from you, then they are more likely to actually deliver on those goods and actually provide you those spaces because you've essentially paid towards it.
Great, this is why we have students on board to think laterally and differently and throw an idea that nobody's said before. So, yeah.
I have a payroll and accounts background before coming to Murray, and I'm just like thinking of like all the entries of a pay slip, and I'm like, how can we actually create a benefit that truly benefits the employee? So yeah, working in reward and benefits and payroll and HR is kind of my background. So that point really thought, well, how can we actually, rather than just talking about what we want or how can it be delivered in reality, the real reality behind that is money and who's willing to invest it and where that money is going to come from.
Sure. Thank you, Stevie. Rory, given that we began late, do we get to stay on a bit later or do we need to wrap up now?
I'm not sure. I haven't heard any word from Joe. There's not a time. Well, there is a timer on this breakout session, but it's got another 57 minutes to go. So, but I think we were due a break at 3:30 anyway. For coffee break, comfort break, etc. So I think if you're wanting to continue on for a few more minutes, then by all means. And the next session starts at 3:45, so I think Joe will end it a couple of minutes before that time anyway. So if you want to continue, please do so.
Okay. Is there anybody else burning to chip in anything on this?
Just from my point of view, Mandy, thank you for organising it, because it's been hugely helpful for me actually answering some of the questions that you asked that I thought I knew the answer to and I actually didn't. And I know that we're going to have a show in January, and I think where I started is not going to be what's going to be presented. So it's ongoing, isn't it? I don't think it's one of those issues that ever comes to a concrete end, but it's been hugely helpful to meet other people as well, teaching and other perspectives to kind of fuel that awareness.
Yeah, sure. It's been, from my point of view, it's been a year-long, really interesting conversation. Yeah, one final opportunity. Does anybody else? Rosie, do you want to come in with the last word? Is it? But before Rosie, is there anybody else who'd like to? Who's got a burning to speak that you want to say something? Please go for it.
Can I just say quickly?
Go for it, Paul.
That thing you did, the liminal zone thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that activities like that sound really productive, and I think it would be nice if some of us could get the opportunity to engage in activities like that, because they would be very useful.
Yeah, absolutely. Rosie, do you want to give us a last word?
Yeah, thanks, Roxanne. Roxanne, sorry, I looked at Roxanne, I meant Mandy. Yes, thanks, Mandy. Yeah, thank you all for coming. I just thought that, again, like everybody in the retreat thought, and as Paul's just said, it was just such an amazing opportunity to go to Lochmaddy and be with a group of artists who are also teachers, and the actual location was so magical as well, being on an island, and it's pretty extreme example. I'm sure UHI wouldn't allow us all to do that all the time, but it just is food for thought. How do we kind of get those kind of things? And sometimes I think it's so incredible to meet people in a similar situation, even though we're all individuals, to get that chance to talk, to get that space to talk, and to compare, and particularly as a lot of us are locked down in our own houses, and because we'd already experienced being on our own for so long, it was just mind-blowingly wonderful. So any kind of way of using that as an example where people can kind of get that kind of peer support, and people from different institutions and different perspectives, was just really interesting. But there was another point as well I was going to pick up about this idea of, it was what Anne said, that I think there's an example in China where there was a problem that a lot of the workers were overstretched, overworked, and they gave them watches and they had to count how many steps, and if they didn't do lots of steps and get healthy, they got their wages deducted and things like that. And I was actually thinking that there needs to be a balance, because if you say things like, we're going to have exhibitions for staff, but you don't give the staff time to actually be creative, to have that porous time to create the work, then it could actually add to more pressure. So it's like getting that sort of well-being and the health of the staff, and allowing their creative practice to go at their different paces, because everybody has different ebbs and flows of creative practice. One of the things that we found out, that not everybody works in the same way. I thought that was really great and interesting and food for thought. And yeah, thank you for coming.
No, absolutely. Thank you very much, Rosie. And you're totally right. The tide is different in the times of the tides are different in every bay. The behaviour of the tide is different on every stretch of the coastline. And I'm sure that goes for our own internal interfaces between the different aspects of our identities and the time. I think that apparent contradiction that Helen flagged up at the beginning seems inherent about the tides as well, that we can get a tide timetable and we know exactly when the tides are due, but actually in reality there's no two tides are ever the same, and so there's a great kind of flexibility in them as well. As has been mentioned also by Stacey and Rosie, we do have an exhibition that is going to be launched on the 21st of January at Murray College of the work of the people who've been involved in this project. And it'll then go to Tykiersova for February, and then hopefully to SAMS, our marine partner down in Dunstaffnage after that. If anybody else wants it to travel to where you are, then get in touch. It would be great to keep it roaming and use it as a way to keep this conversation happening. And we'll also be working to get the imagery and the poetry and everything else up online as well, in some form. And I think because the more we can celebrate the arts work that we're doing here at UHI, the better for us all, I'm sure. And so other than that, I just want to say thank you all very, very much indeed for coming, and let this conversation continue. But it was great to have you all wash up here on this particular shore, and thank you all very much indeed for coming.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thanks,
right.
folks.
Lovely emoji things.
That's modern students.